And now we're going to go to a higher level yet. So we are lucky to have Craig Altemose. He is Executive Director of the Better Future Project. The Better Future Project also runs 350.org in Massachusetts. Does anybody know why an organization would be named 350? A couple of us do. Why 350? All right, so how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere today? We have about 400 parts per million in the atmosphere, more or less. And actually what we need in the atmosphere is a target of 350 parts per million, because at that we would have the kind of climate that we've enjoyed for a long time, since humans have been on the planet. But unfortunately, we're pumping more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year. Craig and his organization are leaders in mobilizing the public and galvanizing support for grassroots work, international work, campaigning for legislation to put rules in place so that we can have a livable planet, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. So please join me in welcoming Craig here today. Thank you very much for making it up, Craig. I'm going to try to stop.
Sounds good. All right, can folks hear me? Or do I need to still talk into the mic? We'll do the mic, all right. So thank you, Tim, for that warm introduction. As Tim said, my name is Craig Altemose. I'm the Executive Director of Better Future Project, which is home of 350 Mass for a Better Future. Before I begin my remarks, I'd just love to get a sense of who's here in the audience and who you all are. Raise your hand if you feel like you follow climate policy somewhat closely. So a lot of folks familiar with climate policy. Raise your hand if you feel like you're part of the climate movement right now. Excellent. All right, well, my job here is to work to help you get more involved in the movement and to emphasize the critical role that the climate movement has to play in this work. So broadly speaking, I'm going to talk about where we are. A little bit awkward. Where we are, where we need to go, and how we're going to get there. It's going to be the focus of my remarks. So where we are right now, at really the macro level, is that I think we are seeing one of the most pivotal struggles in human history, where we have the wealthiest industry in the history of humanity on one side, and we have everyday people like you on the other. And this struggle has been playing out now for several decades, and it is approaching a pretty exciting and important moment. But just to give you a history, I'm just going to kind of highlight the power on the one hand of the fossil fuel industry, and on the other hand, the growing power of the climate movement. Does anyone know when we first learned about climate change in Congress, when Congress first officially was notified about climate change? Tim?
79?
I believe it was 1981. At least that was the first time that James Hansen, who is a top NASA climate scientist, testified before Congress about climate change. Now, for full disclosure, I was not even alive in 1981. And in the intervening years, I've managed to not only graduate from high school and college, but I've earned 2 advanced degrees, and I've founded this organization, which is now 5 years old, not to date myself too much. Anyone want to guess, between 1981 and today, how many bills Congress has passed to explicitly address climate change, to directly address climate change? 0. 0 bills. Again, so I'm today fully to myself. I'm 31 years old. So for the entirety of my 31 years on this earth, Congress has known about this problem, and they have yet to pass a single bill to address it. Now, the reason that is the case is because of the power of the fossil fuel industry. And to give you just one particularly painful story about the strength of their power, folks may remember in 2008, that election, the Hope and Change election, There was a Democrat elected after 8 years of climate denialism under George W. Bush. And the Democrats didn't just win the presidency, but they won the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, right? And just as it happened, there was a really major international climate conference scheduled for December of 2009. And this conference was basically when world leaders were going to come together and decide how humanity would respond to climate change. Pivotal moment in human history. And so all major environmental organizations in lead up to 2009 said, we are going all in. We are going to pass legislation this session. And all of the major environmental foundations doubled their spending. Said, this is the moment. We've got to go all in. Let's make this happen. And even our political leaders on Capitol Hill, I was talking with some of Senator Kerry's staff, who was at this time representing Massachusetts to the United States Senate, and he was also the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, so had a really crucial role in negotiating this treaty. He and Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, between the two of them, they sat down and had one-on-one conversations with every single other member, all other 98 members in the United States Senate, with no staff in the room, where they basically said, what will to get you to vote for this bill? How do we get this bill passed? And so it was all hands on deck. Let's make this thing happen. And even though the environmental community, again, doubled their spending, went all in, anyone want to guess how the fossil fuel industry responded? They also increased their spending, and by some measures, they outspent the environmental community by 15-1. Right now, so during that congressional election, 2009, 2010, the fossil fuel industry, from what we can track, spent about $200 million on campaign contributions and direct lobbying. $200 million. It's a lot of money, right? But just to give you a sense of the full power of the fossil fuel industry, ExxonMobil traditionally makes about $10 billion of profit, not revenue, profit per quarter. Right? So $200 million to the entire industry is just a small drop in the bucket in terms of the full financial power that this industry has to bring to bear. And even with just spending a relatively small chunk of the profits of the entire industry, not even just of the one company, we actually did manage to get a bill through the House of Representatives, but when it was brought before the United States Senate, they actually did not bring it to a vote because they knew they could not get it passed. And there's a really tragic quote, just to depress you a little bit more. We'll have an uplifting stage in a moment, so bear with me. John Kerry, again, who was trying to get this legislation passed, he was quoted in the press, and this is a quote that he deliberately chose, which I like to say summed up his negotiating position, which was, we feel like we've compromised a lot, and we're prepared to compromise further. That was John Kerry's stated position to the press, basically saying, please, coal industry, gas industry, oil industry, just tell us what we need to do, what more sacrifices we need to make. They gave billions of dollars to research in clean coal, and they gave billions of dollars to the nuclear industry for loan-free guarantees, and they tried to buy out Wall Street and big finance, and with all those giveaways, they still couldn't get even a pretty inadequate and weak bill passed. Which brings us, in some ways, forward to today, right, where later this month, they're giving another round of negotiations in Paris. The next major iteration of climate change negotiations. And the good news is that we are in a fundamentally different place as a people, as a movement. And I want to give you an example now of the strength of the movement. So I joined the movement myself around 2006. And in 2005, Bill McKibben, who's a dear friend and a great leader, organized really the first major mobilization around climate change, which was 1,000 people marching in Vermont. And that was the largest demonstration we'd seen of people in the streets on climate change. I had the privilege in 2007 of helping to organize a 5,000-person student conference in Washington, D.C., the first youth climate conference called Power Shift. And in 2009, 2010, we had rallies of 10,000, 12,000 people in D.C. Some of you may have been, anyone go to the Ford on Climate rally in 2013 in D.C.? I thought Tim might have been. 40,000 people took to the streets of DC demanding action on climate, forward action on climate. And most recently, in September of last year, anyone make it to the People's Climate March in New York City? I actually didn't make it either, so don't worry. I had a wedding. Nearly 400,000 people took to the streets demanding progress on climate change. And a lot of this movement energy has been focused recently around the Keystone XL pipeline. And you may know where I'm going with this story. But the Keystone pipeline was first proposed probably around, I think, 2007 or so. And it was basically seen as a done. The Canadian government was really aggressively pushing this pipeline that would run from Canada all the way to Texas. And again, to show you the power of this industry, one of the top lobbyists they hired was Hillary Clinton's deputy campaign manager for her 2008 campaign. And as a Secretary of State, it was basically her job to recommend to the president whether or not they approve this pipeline. So they hired someone super close, professionally and personally, to the main decision maker. And this was an issue, no one had heard of the Keystone Pipeline in 2008. This was not an election issue. So many pipelines in this country, right? Nobody had heard about this. And it was just expected to go through. And again, people signed petitions, we had rallies. I was one of 1,253 people to get arrested in DC in the summer of 2011. And this suddenly became an issue. It became something that people were talking about, and the Republicans made this their top priorities. They tried to attach passing the Keystone Pipeline to this bill and that bill and to force the administration to approve it. And Obama, used his third veto of his presidency. He has not been vetoing very many bills. He used his third veto of the presidency to block a bill that would force him to approve the Keystone Pipeline. And just a couple weeks ago, TransCanada was really getting nervous, and they said, you know what, actually, can we have that permit request back? Don't make a decision on that, please. We retract our request to build a pipeline for now, in the hopes that the next president may be more sympathetic to their cause. And I think, as you all know, yesterday, President Obama formally announced that he was blocking the construction of this pipeline because of climate change, which is the first time any major infrastructure project like this has been blocked by a political leader knowing full well all the arguments about we need these jobs, this is going to help with energy independence, this is going to help with national security. He really took the long-term perspective on what's the important thing for the long term for our country, what's the long-term importance for our national security, our economy, for jobs, and realized that a stable climate trumps everything else as we make these decisions. So again, this movement, that was a victory that no one saw coming. All the finance experts, the Wall Street commentators, this was a slam dunk, and they were wrong. And I'm sure many of you helped contribute to that victory. So we have this moment now where we are rising. Politics is a lagging indicator of social change. The polls on marriage equality shifted well before the actual politics caught up to that, right? We are seeing that the same way on climate change right now. Even though the majority of Republicans in Congress currently deny that climate change is a problem that we need to address. Right now, not only the majority of Americans, but even the majority of Republicans, of registered Republicans around the country, now see that climate change is a priority, that it's real, that humans are responsible, and they support taking action to address it, even if that means paying higher energy bills. That's where the country is right now. The politicians have to catch up to us. So in terms of where we need to go, happily, it's a pretty simple solution. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to embrace a 100% clean energy economy. And there's a great study, there's a Stanford engineer named Mark Jacobson, who if you guys haven't checked this out, you should check out thesolutionsproject.org. He's working with Mark Ruffalo, among others, the Hulk from the Avengers, if you've seen that. They did an individual state-by-state analysis where they proved that every single state in this country, using currently available technology, could power their economies with 100% clean energy by 2050. Every single state using, again, resources within their own state, which means not having to buy energy, not having to buy coal, oil, or gas from another state, much less another country, but really tapping your in-state resources, investing in in-state jobs, local, good-paying jobs to power your economy. The first thing we need to do to make that happen is to stop building more fossil fuel infrastructure, like the Keystone Pipeline, which is why this fight was so crucial. When we're making these investments, these are decade-long investments. 50, 100 years pipelines last, power plants last. We know we want to get completely off of fossil fuels by 2050, and arguably by 2040 or even 2030 if we can manage to do that. I mean, tomorrow if we can manage to do that. Like, the moral imperative is now. We need to immediately stop burning fossil fuels. And as quickly as we can do that, we need to do that. So it does not make sense to make new investments in infrastructure that's supposed to last, again, way past the timeline when we know we need to shut them down. That's something called stranded assets, right? If you build something and you haven't earned back your investment, then you have a stranded asset, and the people who invested in that are going to lose money. And this is actually the theory behind the divestment movement. Has anyone heard of the fossil fuel divestment movement? Excellent, lots of folks. So yeah, again, trillions, literally trillions of dollars of funds now have been pulled out of the fossil fuel industry. Everyone from the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, who got their money originally from Standard Oil, have now said, this is a bad industry, we need to pull out of it. Stanford University has divested from coal, Syracuse University has divested from all fossil fuels. The United Church of Christ was the first national denomination to pull all of its money out of fossil fuels. It's not the last. More and more individual churches, universities, towns. I think there have been 14 towns in Massachusetts have voted to divest. We're working to divest the state pension fund from fossil fuels. Recognizing both there's a moral imperative that we should not have, if it's wrong to wreck the planet, it's wrong to profit from that. But also that as the government gets more serious about climate change, and as we've already seen the coal industry, their profits just plummet. And anyone who was invested in coal lost a lot of money. And as we get serious about climate change, the stock prices of ExxonMobil, all the gas companies, all the oil companies are just going to go down. And if you're left with your money in those stocks, when the government says, you know what, it's time to get serious about this, let's not just stop this one pipeline, but stop all the new pipelines. And let's start shutting down coal plants. Let's start shutting down gas drilling sites. We're going to see a pretty precipitous decline in the value of these stocks. And I know it feels like a pretty big lift, but I want to share two quick stories about how we can achieve progress pretty quickly, and then I'll move to some Q&A. The first is actually to take us back to World War II, when the United States very quickly pivoted from a civilian-based economy to a wartime economy. Now, folks may remember, World War II, the official start date was 1939, when Germany invaded and occupied Poland. And at that time, Poland's military was actually ranked as stronger than the United States military, because we were investing. After World War I, we demilitarized. We weren't afraid about the Canadians and the Mexicans invading. We weren't really focused on a military might. And anyone know how long it took Germany to invade and occupy Poland? 3 weeks. It took them 3 weeks to take over the whole country. And their military was stronger than ours. All right. So, as everyone knows, in 1941 we were bombed in Pearl Harbor, which really brought us into war. And in 1940, the year before that, we had built a total of 4,000 aircraft. It was a newer industry, kind of like solar and wind are newer industries. We'd only built 4,000 aircraft. In the beginning of 1942, after we were bombed, President Roosevelt set some pretty audacious goals around how we should really fully invest in militarizing our economy. And among them, he said, let's build 60,000 aircraft to bring to bear this new technology that we really need. And a lot of people thought, 60,000 aircraft, that's crazy. We've only built 4,000 in 1 year. We're not going to get 60,000. But others appreciate it if you set a really high goal. Maybe you won't hit the full goal of 60,000, but maybe you'll get 40,000 or 20,000 or 30,000, whatever it is, more than just 4,000, right? And what we did was we basically then pivoted from a civilian-based economy to a wartime economy. Toy manufacturers started making bullets. Corset manufacturers started making gun belts. We stopped producing civilian automobiles and just started, all of those car manufacturers built tanks and airplane engines and armored cars for our military. And at the start of that, from the start of 1942, when President Roosevelt gave that speech, to the end of 1944, we didn't build 4,000 planes. We didn't build 60,000 planes. We built 216,600 aircraft. And it was through that militarization of our economy that we managed to overcome the dual forces of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany and make the world safe for democracy. And that required everyone to be involved. It wasn't just the military leading, right? The men who went to the foreign shores to fight those wars left behind a whole lot of women who were left running the country, building all the weapons, raising the kids, and crucially growing the food. You know, we had victory gardens where half of the agriculture we produced during the war was produced in the front yard and the backyard of individual homes, because people came together and built this thing. And that's what we need to do here on climate change, except instead of building airplanes and tanks, we need to build solar panels and wind turbines and invest in this clean energy economy. So technically we can do this. We have the technology. We just need the political will. And for those of you who remember the 70s, we saw what a political movement can do when it's united behind clear, aggressive targets for the environment. 20 million Americans came out around the country on Earth Day. They got involved electorally, and we saw the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act, all signed into law by tree hugger Richard Nixon. Not because he actually gave a damn about the environment, but because he knew that millions of Americans cared about this, and that if he wanted to get reelected, he needed to show action on climate change. He actually called himself the environmentalist president. So social movements can win this thing, and we here in Massachusetts have a crucial role to play. We've seen from healthcare to marriage equality, when Massachusetts leads, the rest of the country follows. And we as a small state can play a really important role. So I really encourage you guys to check out 350 Massachusetts to get involved in the local movement. We're actually having a kickoff for a North Shore node or chapter of 350 Mass next Saturday. We have a table out here in the fair, so I encourage you to stop by, talk to folks, sign up to join our email list, and come out next weekend, next Saturday, to that kickoff meeting to find out how you can get involved in helping to build this movement to save life on Earth as we know it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you all. Jay?
Yeah, could you bring it back, comments were awesome.
Thank you.
Bring it back to the local agenda, talking about mass energy policy.
Yep.
I know that the Department of Public Utilities is toying with this tariff, which is doing pipelines, and bringing frac Pennsylvania shale gas to Massachusetts. Massachusetts is about to set its state energy policy for the next 25 years. It's really a key time for us.
Absolutely.
Back to us in this room, we're going up to all their representatives who say, yo, dude, we don't want frac Pennsylvania shale gas. We don't want Governor Baker to head down the road which he is heading down. Even to the point that Congressman Moulton, who when we talked to him a couple of months ago, said, listen, Jay, I get it. You know, I was a physics major at Harvard. I'm a young guy. I know about frac gas. I know about climate change. But recently, Congressman Moulton has met with the industry, and now he seems to be backpedaling. And apparently he thinks we need frac Pennsylvania shale gas. I would urge everyone here to call him up, call up Governor Baker, because it's going to get decided in the next couple of years what happens in Mass for 25 years. It's very much a key time right now. That's all.
Yeah, so Jay asked a really great question, which I was hoping to get to, and then I realized I was getting a little bit long, I thought. about what's happening here at the state level. And we are really at a crossroads here in Massachusetts right now. So we have a number of coal plants and nuclear facilities coming online. And the fossil fuel industry, led by the gas industry right now, the fracked gas industry, really wants to just switch out one dirty fuel for another. And not only that, but they want you to pay for it. So as Jay said, Governor Baker in his Department of Public Utilities has said that it's possible that they can charge a tariff on everyone's electricity bill to increase your electricity bills to pay for them to construct these new pipelines that, again, are going to last decades and decades and decades, well longer than we want them to last, which are really destined for foreign export. It's no secret. I mean, the industry tries to keep it a secret, but the truth of the matter is that the price of gas right now in Europe and Asia is 2 or 3 times higher than the price of gas is within the United States. And so if you're a business person, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out, we want to get our product to the people who are willing to pay a heck of a lot more for it, right? Like, that's just common sense. One of the pipelines they're trying to build, Spectra, is called the Atlantic Bridge Project. That's how bad a job they are of keeping this hidden. They want to build a bridge across the Atlantic so they can get their fuel to Europe and sell it to the Europeans, who are paying the Russians for expensive gas. They'd much rather get it from us. And so the policies that we're setting right now are going to determine whether we build these new pipelines and we're paying for them, we the people, through our electricity bills for the next several decades to shoot up the profits of these corporations as they export their fuel abroad. And again, if they are able to charge higher prices abroad, what is that going to do to our domestic prices? It's just going to increase them, because supply and demand, right? If they can get more of their product overseas, that means that there's less supply in the US. Less supply means prices go up, if you've studied economics. So they want us to spend money so they can get more profits, and then also we pay more for a really bad fuel that's going to hurt us all and hurt our future and hurt our country. So instead, we really need to be investing in offshore wind, in solar, in efficiency. These are really common sense investments that doesn't require us to get our energy from poisoning people's water in Pennsylvania, but instead get our energy from our roofs, from our coasts, and to invest in efficiency. I mean, Larry has done some really great work on this. I know I've got some sense of, and folks in Gloucester are doing some really important work on this. You can't ship a house to China and say, make this more efficient for us and send it back. These are really important local jobs that we have here if we invest in our economy instead of investing in making these multinational corporations wealthier. There's a group called the Mass Power Forward Coalition, which involves over 100 organizations around the state that have come together to say this is a pivotal time for us. Thrifty Mass is a founding member and playing a really important leading role in that coalition. And we're pushing Governor Baker to not levy that tariff, to not make us pay for these pipelines, and again, instead to invest in things like offshore wind, which, the offshore wind industry alone, offshore wind as an energy source alone, could power the entire East Coast, I think, 4 times over if we fully tapped offshore wind. Europe has over 80 offshore wind farms, either up and running or under construction and ready to go. And we are right now building our first wind farm in America, our very first off the coast of Rhode Island. And so it's not a question of technology, it's a question of political will. Europe has provided the right incentives to make that happen. We haven't, and we should, and we have that moment now in this legislative cycle. There's going to be a big bill that's getting passed. The governor wants something, the speaker pro temp of the House wants something. All the political players are coming together, and the question is, what would that bill look like? And you guys have a crucial role in shaping that. So really, really, really want to encourage you to get involved. Contact your local representatives. Contact the governor to push for clean, renewable energy and not frack gas in our energy future. Do we have time for another question? Or one more question? All right. Thank you. Oh, all right, one.
Well, Deborah and I were talking. We thought that exporting natural gas was illegal. I thought that we weren't allowed to do that. So the question is it illegal to export natural gas?
I honestly can't answer that. I'm pretty sure that it's not, because again, they're making plans to do it. It may have, it does ring a vague bell, so it may have been once upon a time. I mean, it used to be, interestingly, illegal to drill for natural gas because it is so explosive. That back in the day, it was actually illegal to drill for that because, again, one of the other harms of natural gas is that methane, which is what gas basically is very, very flammable. And you see a lot of explosions. That's why when there's a gas leak, right, like that's a pretty serious thing. You want to get out of town. They've found tens of thousands of gas leaks of varying sizes in Boston alone, in the city of Boston alone. We've got so many gas leaks all up and down the state. This is aging infrastructure. So this is a very, very dangerous fuel that we don't want to be deepening our addiction to. And we don't want the rest of the world deepening their addiction to either. Sorry. Thank you all again. And again, we've got a table, 350 Mass. Hope to join you. You can also sign up on our website, which the link is right here, 350mass.betterfutureproject.org. Hope to see you out there.